The spotlight hit him like a slap. Harsh, white, unforgiving. Raymond Foster stood center stage in his stained work shirt, hands trembling under the weight of 1,000 stares, while Veronica Lane's laughter echoed through the theater like shattered glass. She had pulled him from the shadows behind the curtain, from the safety of ropes and pulleys, where men like him belonged, and thrust him into the cruel glare of her world. The audience murmured, cameras flashed, and somewhere in the back rows, people were already pulling out their phones, hungry for the spectacle of a nobody's humiliation. He could see it in their eyes, the same look his son's teachers gave him at parent conferences, the look that said he didn't belong anywhere near a stage. Veronica handed him the microphone, with that smirk of hers, choosing a song she knew would break him notes that climbed higher than mercy allowed. The theater held its breath, waiting for the inevitable collapse. But what none of them knew, what nobody could have guessed as they watched this man in his worn-out shoes take that first shaking breath, was that some people carry secrets in their throats. And sometimes the loudest voices in the room are the ones that have been silent the longest. 3 hours earlier, Raymond had arrived at the Riverside Theater with a toolbox in one hand and a thermos of coffee in the other. The building loomed against the evening sky, its Art Deco facade glowing with the promise of magic that would unfold inside. But Raymond never entered through the front doors. His world existed in the narrow corridors backstage, where the glamour gave way to exposed wiring and the smell of old wood mixed with fresh paint. He had worked here for 6 years, ever since his wife passed away, and left him with an 8-year-old son named Danny, and a mountain of medical bills that seemed to grow taller each month. The theater paid $12 an hour, which was not much, but it was steady. And steady was all Raymond could ask for anymore. He clocked in at the stage manager's office, exchanging nods with the evening crew. Most of them were like him, invisible people who made the magic possible, while others took the bows. There was something honest about that work, something solid. Raymond had learned to find peace in the weight of a wrench in his hand, in the satisfying click of a spotlight locking into place. Tonight was a big production, one of those charity galas, where wealthy patrons paid $500 a plate to feel good about themselves while watching Broadway stars perform. Veronica Lane was headlining, and the entire theater had been buzzing about it for weeks. Raymond had seen her face on every poster, that perfect smile that looked like it had never known a hard day. The calluses on his hands told a different story. Each ridge and rough patch was a chapter the year he worked double shifts at the factory. The months he drove a delivery truck until 3 in the morning. The countless nights he repaired broken things because hiring someone else was a luxury he could not afford. But those same hands had also braided his daughter's hair, before she got on the school bus, had taught his son how to tie his shoes, had held them both when grief felt too heavy to carry alone. Danny was everything now. Every morning alarm at 5:30, every skipped meal, every aching muscle was for that boy. Raymond thought about him as he checked the rigging for the main curtain, imagining Danny at home, with Mrs. Chen from next door, probably doing homework at the kitchen table, or maybe sneaking an extra hour of cartoons. What Raymond did not tell anyone at the theater, what he barely admitted to himself, was that he used to sing. Not professionally. Never. That. But in another life before tragedy, rewrote everything he had been, the guy at family gatherings who everyone asked to perform. His mother used to say he had a gift, though Raymond always brushed it off as her being biased. He had sung at his wedding, making his bride cry with a rendition of a love song that still played in his memory on the hardest nights. After she died, he sang lullabies to Danny when nightmares came. But as the years passed and exhaustion became his constant companion, the music faded to something he only remembered in quiet moments. It felt like a part of himself he had locked away, because there was no room for dreams when survival demanded everything. The theater filled slowly as Raymond worked. He could hear the murmur of voices growing louder, the clink of glasses, the rustle of expensive fabric. From his position in the wings, he watched the stage crew make final adjustments. The lighting designer barked orders into her headset. The sound engineer ran levels one more time. Everything had to be perfect for Veronica Lane. Raymond had seen her earlier, sweeping past him without a glance, surrounded by assistants who carried her water bottles and adjusted her microphone pack. She moved through the backstage area like a queen surveying her kingdom, and in a way she was. This was her world. Raymond was just borrowing space in it. He found himself humming as he coiled cables, something he did without thinking whenever his hands were busy. It was an old jazz standard one his father used to play on Sunday mornings. The melody felt good in his throat, a gentle reminder that some parts of himself still existed beneath the exhaustion. He was alone in the storage corridor, or so he thought, his voice barely above a whisper as he worked through a particularly tricky run of notes. The acoustics back here were strange, the narrow space amplifying sound in unexpected ways. Raymond let himself get lost in it for just a moment, that brief escape into something that felt like home. Danny had asked him that morning why he never sang anymore. They were eating breakfast cereal because Raymond had not had time to cook anything substantial, and the question had caught him off guard. How do you explain to an 8-year-old that some doors close not because you want them to, but because life demands you walk a different path? Raymond had smiled and changed the subject, promising they would go to the park on Sunday if the weather held. But the question stayed with him, lodged somewhere in his chest, like a stone he could not dislodge. Maybe Danny had heard him humming in the shower. Maybe the boy simply remembered a version of his father that used to exist before the world got so heavy. The stage manager's voice crackled through the intercom, calling places for the top of the show. Raymond finished securing the last cable and made his way to his assigned position, stage left. His job during performances was simple: watch for problems. Be ready to fix anything that went wrong. Stay invisible. He was good at invisible. Years of working multiple jobs had taught him how to move through spaces without drawing attention, how to make himself small enough that important people never had to acknowledge his existence. It was a survival skill, one he had mastered out of necessity, but sometimes in moments he would never admit. Out loud, Raymond wondered what it might feel like to be seen, really seen, not just as the guy who fixed broken things, but as someone who mattered. Veronica Lane took the stage to thunderous applause, and Raymond had to admit she commanded attention. Her voice was technically flawless, hitting each mark with the precision of someone who had spent a lifetime perfecting their craft. The audience was rapt, hanging on every note, every gesture. This was what success looked like: the expensive gown, the perfect hair, the confidence that came from knowing you were exactly where you belonged. Raymond watched from the shadows and felt the vast distance between her world and his. She would leave here tonight in a town car, probably heading to some after-party where people would tell her how brilliant she was. He would take the bus home, check on Danny, and fall asleep in front of the television before his next shift started. The gala ran smoothly through the first half. Raymond stayed alert, scanning the rigging, watching the lights, ready for any crisis that might require his attention. During intermission, he retreated to the storage corridor to grab a quick drink from his thermos. The coffee was cold by now, but caffeine was caffeine. He was tired in a way that went deeper than any single night. The kind of exhaustion that came from years of not quite sleeping enough, not quite eating right, not quite catching his breath. But he could not afford to slow down. The bills did not care about tired. Danny needed new shoes. The rent was due in a week. The electricity company had sent a warning notice that Raymond had tucked into his wallet like a ticking clock. He was humming again, without realizing it, running through vocal exercises his high school choir teacher had drilled into them decades ago. The warm-ups felt rusty, his voice cracking slightly on the higher passages, but there was something meditative about the practice. It reminded him that he used to be someone who did this, someone who thought in melodies and harmonies. Raymond pushed a little higher, testing his range, curious if any of that old flexibility remained. His voice opened up in the narrow corridor, surprising him with its clarity. For 30 seconds he let himself exist in that space where nothing hurt, and everything was possible. That was when Veronica Lane rounded the corner, flanked by 2 of her assistants. Raymond stopped mid-phrase, embarrassment flooding through him like ice water. He must have looked ridiculous. A middle-aged man in work clothes, singing to himself in a storage corridor. Veronica's perfectly shaped eyebrows lifted, and that smile, the one from all the posters, spread across her face. But it was not warm. It was the smile of someone who had just spotted something amusing, something that might entertain her for a moment before she moved on to more important things. Raymond wanted to disappear, to melt into the walls and pretend this encounter had never happened. Veronica tilted her head, studying him, with the kind of attention you might give to a peculiar artifact in a museum. Her assistants exchanged glances, already smiling at whatever was about to unfold. Raymond clutched his thermos, wishing he could turn back time by 60 seconds. She took a step closer, and he caught the scent of expensive perfume mixed with hairspray. Everything about her screamed success, from the designer dress to the flawless makeup that somehow survived hours under stage lights. She looked at his stained work shirt, his worn boots, the thermos that had seen better days. The contrast between them could not have been more stark. "Raymond Foster," she said, reading his name tag with exaggerated care. "So you like to sing?" Her voice carried that theatrical quality that never quite turned off projecting even in casual conversation. Her assistants giggled, a sound that made Raymond's face burn. He wanted to explain that he had just been killing time, that it did not mean anything, but the words stuck in his throat. Veronica's eyes sparkled with something that might have been curiosity, or might have been cruelty. Raymond could not quite tell the difference. She turned to her assistants, then back to Raymond, and he could see an idea forming behind that perfect smile. An idea that he already knew would not end well for him. "You know what would be fun?" Veronica said, her voice taking on a conspiratorial tone that somehow still carried an edge. "The second half is about to start, and I was thinking we should do something special, something unexpected." She paused for effect, letting the tension build the way performers do when they know they have an audience. Her assistants leaned in, eager to hear whatever scheme she was proposing. Raymond felt his stomach drop, that instinctive warning that comes right before something goes terribly wrong. He was not part of whatever this was. He could not be. He was supposed to stay invisible, stay in the shadows where people like him belonged. But Veronica Lane had other plans. She reached out and plucked the thermos from his hands, setting it aside with a gesture that felt both casual and oddly intimate. Then she took his arm, her grip surprisingly firm for someone with such delicate-looking fingers. "Come with me," she said, and it was not a request. Her assistants fell in step behind them as she steered Raymond toward the stage. He tried to protest, tried to explain that he had work to do, that he could not just leave his position. But Veronica was not listening. She was already narrating their journey to her assistants, spinning some story about spontaneity and authentic moments, and giving ordinary people their shot at the spotlight. The stage manager tried to stop them as they approached the wings. There were protocols, cues, a carefully orchestrated second half that did not include random crew members. But Veronica waved away objections with the confidence of someone who had never been told no in any meaningful way. She was the star. The whole evening revolved around her. If she wanted to bring a stagehand into the performance, who was going to stop her? Raymond saw the stage manager's face cycle through confusion, concern, and finally resignation. There was a brief hushed conversation into headsets, voices sharp with tension, but ultimately, Veronica got what she wanted. She always got what she wanted. Raymond's heart hammered against his ribs as she pulled him toward the curtain. Through the gap, he could see the audience settling back into their seats after intermission. Hundreds of people, maybe 1,000, all dressed in clothes that cost more than his monthly salary. The lights were bright, impossibly bright, making the stage look like another world entirely. This was not his place. He fixed the mechanisms that created this magic. He was never supposed to be part of it. His hands were shaking now, a tremor he could not control, no matter how hard he tried to steady himself. Veronica noticed, and her smile widened, as if his fear was exactly what she had been hoping for. The audience settled as the lights dimmed. Veronica strode onto the stage with the ease of someone who had done this thousands of times, and the crowd erupted in applause. She basked in it for a moment, letting the adoration wash over her before raising her hands for silence. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice filling every corner of the theater with practiced precision. "I believe in magic, real magic, the kind that happens when we take chances, when we give people opportunities they never expected." Her words flowed like honey, each phrase crafted to manipulate emotion. The audience leaned forward, curious about where this was going. Tonight, Veronica continued, "I want to do something special, something that reminds us all that talent can be found in the most unexpected places." She gestured toward the wings where Raymond stood, frozen, his body refusing to obey his desperate wish to run. "Come on out here, Raymond." The spotlight swung toward him, harsh and unforgiving, turning the wings from a place of safety into an exposed platform. The audience murmured, confused by this deviation from the program. Raymond could not move. His feet had become part of the floor. But Veronica's assistant gave him a gentle push, and suddenly he was walking step by horrible step into the light. The spotlight hit him like a slap, harsh, white, unforgiving. It was the same moment from which this story began. But now Raymond experienced it from the input, every sensation amplified by terror. His work shirt looked worse under the stage lights, every stain visible, every worn thread exposed. He could feel the weight of 1,000 stares, could sense the audience trying to figure out who he was and why he was interrupting their expensive evening. Veronica's laughter echoed through the theater, not cruel exactly, but not kind either. It was the laugh of someone who found this whole situation entertaining, who saw Raymond as a prop in whatever narrative she was constructing. The audience murmured, cameras flashed, and somewhere in the back rows people were already pulling out their phones. Raymond understood immediately what this was. Entertainment. A spectacle. The novelty of watching some nobody try and fail at something they had no business attempting. He could see it in their eyes, the same look his son's teachers gave him at parent conferences, the look that said he did not belong anywhere near a stage. That look that measured him and found him wanting before he even opened his mouth. Veronica handed him the microphone with that smirk of hers, and Raymond took it, because refusing would have been worse somehow. His hand wrapped around it, feeling the weight of expectation and predetermined failure. "So, Raymond here," Veronica announced to the audience, "has a little secret. I caught him singing backstage, and let me tell you, he thinks he has what it takes." She drew out the last words, making them sound absurd. Light laughter rippled through the crowd, nervous and anticipatory. We are going to give him a chance to show us what he has got." The way she said it made clear that she expected very little. This was a game to her, a moment of spontaneous entertainment that would make a good story later. "Look what I did at the gala. I pulled some random worker onto the stage. How delightfully unpredictable I am. What song would you like to sing?" Raymond Veronica asked. But before he could answer, she continued, "Actually, I have got the perfect one." She turned to the conductor, rattling off a title that made Raymond's blood run cold. It was a ballad famous for its range, a song that climbed into registers most male singers could not touch. A song designed to showcase a vocalist's technical mastery. A song meant to break someone who did not know what they were doing. The conductor looked uncertain, glancing between Veronica and Raymond, but ultimately he nodded. The musicians shuffled their sheet music. The trap was set. Raymond stood there holding the microphone, and for a moment he considered just walking off. He could set down the mic, apologize for wasting everyone's time, and retreat to the safety of his cables and his toolbox. No one would blame him. In fact, they probably expected it. But something stopped him. Maybe it was pride, that stubborn part of himself that refused to be humiliated without at least trying. Maybe it was the thought of Danny watching at home. Mrs. Chen had mentioned the gala was being live-streamed for donors who could not attend. Maybe it was the memory of his wife telling him he had a gift, that he should not hide it away. Or maybe he was just too tired to run anymore. The opening notes began piano and strings building a delicate foundation. Raymond closed his eyes for a moment, trying to find some center of calm in the storm of his panic. His hands were shaking so badly, he had to grip the microphone with both fists to keep it steady. The audience was silent now, waiting for the inevitable collapse. He could feel their anticipation, could sense them getting ready to witness a train wreck. Veronica stood a few feet away, arms crossed, that amused smile never leaving her face. She had set him up perfectly. There was no way out that did not end in humiliation. The first verse started low, and Raymond opened his mouth, letting the words come. His voice cracked on the first word, rough with nerves and disuse. Scattered laughter erupted from the audience. Someone in the third row whispered loudly enough to be heard. Veronica's smile grew. Raymond felt heat rise to his face, shame mixing with anger, mixing with something else, something stubborn that refused to quit. He pushed through the second line, his voice steadier now, finding the melody, even as his heart tried to beat its way out of his chest. It was not beautiful yet. It was barely adequate. But it was sound, and it was his. The song climbed, each phrase reaching higher than the last. This was where Veronica expected him to fail, where most untrained singers would start to strain and crack. Raymond could feel the notes approaching like a cliff edge, knowing he had to either jump or step back. His throat felt tight. His breath came in shallow gasps between phrases. Every instinct screamed at him to stop, to give up before the humiliation became complete. But then he thought about all those mornings waking at 5:30. Thought about Danny's face when he talked about his dad. Thought about every time someone had looked at him like he did not matter. Something shifted in Raymond's chest. The fear did not disappear, but it transformed into something else. Determination, maybe. Or just the desperate need to prove that he was more than what people saw. He loosened his grip on the microphone, stood a little straighter, and let his breath drop deeper. The next phrase came out stronger, the tone rounder. The audience's murmuring quieted slightly. He was not failing yet. Not succeeding, but not failing. Veronica's smile flickered just for a second, as if she had expected him to have given up by now. But Raymond kept going, each note a small victory against the weight of expectation. The The bridge approached the part where the melody soared into the stratosphere. This was the showstopper, the moment that separated professionals from amateurs. Veronica was watching him closely now, no longer amused, but curious. Maybe even a little concerned that her joke was not landing the way she had intended. Raymond felt the note coming, that impossibly high climax that required technique and control and breath support, all things he barely remembered from high school choir. His teacher's voice echoed in his head from 30 years ago. Do not reach for it. Let it float. Support from the diaphragm. Relax the throat. Raymond closed his eyes and stopped trying to force the sound. He thought about Danny's laugh, thought about his wife's hand in his during their wedding, thought about every lullaby he had ever sung in the dark to chase away nightmares. And then he just let go. The note came not from his throat, but from somewhere deeper. Someplace he had forgotten existed. It soared into the theater, clear and pure and absolutely controlled. The audience gasped. Veronica's eyes went wide. Raymond held the note, not straining, not forcing, just letting it exist in the space. And then he took it higher. The whistle register opened up like a door Raymond did not know he had. The note climbed beyond what seemed possible, beyond what Veronica had hit in her performance, beyond what anyone expected from a man in a stained work shirt who fixed broken things for a living. It hung in the air like something crystalline and perfect, and the entire theater held its breath. Raymond sustained it, feeling the power and the fragility of the sound. Knowing this moment was rewriting something fundamental about how these people saw him. Then he brought it down, descending through the register with control that surprised even himself, landing softly on the final phrase, de la chance, absolute silence. For 3 seconds that felt like hours, no one moved. The musicians had stopped playing, the song finished. Raymond stood center stage. The microphone still raised, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst. He could not read the faces staring at him, could not tell if he had actually done what he thought he had done, or if his oxygen-deprived brain was playing tricks. Then someone in the back row stood up. Then another. Then a dozen more. The applause started like thunder, building and building until the entire theater was on its feet. Veronica Lane stood frozen, her perfect composure shattered. Her mouth had fallen open slightly, her eyes fixed on Raymond, with something that looked like disbelief mixed with horror. This was not how her joke was supposed to end. He was supposed to fail, to stumble off stage embarrassed, while she consoled him with patronizing kindness. Instead, he had done something she could not do, had reached notes she had spent years trying to master and never quite achieved. The balance of power in that moment had shifted so completely that even Raymond, still reeling from what had just happened, could feel it in the air. The applause continued, growing louder rather than fading. People were calling out, shouting for more. Raymond lowered the microphone slowly, his hands still shaking, but for different reasons now. He looked at Veronica, saw the calculation happening behind her eyes as she tried to figure out how to salvage this. She was a professional, he would give her that. Within seconds, her composure returned, that smile sliding back into place, even if it did not quite reach her eyes. She began clapping too, encouraging the audience, playing up the moment, as if this had been her plan all along. "What did I tell you?" Veronica said, projecting her voice over the applause. Magic. Real magic. But her tone had changed. The condescension was gone, replaced by something more careful, more calculated. She was a performer, and performers knew how to read a room. This audience had just witnessed something unexpected, and they loved it. Loved the underdog story, the twist, the triumph. If Veronica tried to diminish it now, she would lose them. So instead, she embraced it, pulling Raymond into a hug that cameras would capture, making herself part of his moment, even as she quietly seethed. Raymond stood there, being applauded by 1,000 people, and all he could think about was Danny. Was his son watching? Had Mrs. Chen turned on the live stream? Would Danny have seen his father do something impossible? The thought made his eyes burn with tears. He refused to let fall. Not here, not in front of all these people. He managed a small wave, acknowledging the applause, even though he had no idea what to do with it. The spotlight that had felt like an attack 30 minutes ago now felt warm, almost welcoming. But he still did not belong here. This was not his world. Tomorrow, he would go back to fixing broken things and hoping the bills got paid on time. Veronica eventually guided him off stage, her hand on his elbow, in a gesture that looked supportive, but felt controlling. The audience was still applauding as the curtain came down. Backstage, the crew stared at him with expressions ranging from shock to admiration. The stage manager approached, looking like he could not decide whether to congratulate Raymond or fire him for the disruption. But before any conversation could happen, Veronica pulled Raymond aside away from the others into one of the small dressing rooms. She closed the door, and for a moment, they just looked at each other. Up close, Raymond could see the cracks in her flawless appearance, the slight smudge of makeup near her temple, the tension in her jaw, the way her hands clenched and unclenched. She was angry, he realized. Not just embarrassed, but genuinely angry that he had upstaged her. But she was also smart enough to know that anger would not serve her here. So instead, she smiled again, that professional mask sliding back into place, and extended her hand for a handshake that felt more like a business transaction than a friendly gesture. That was, she began searching for words unexpected. Raymond nodded, not trusting himself to speak yet. His throat felt raw, his whole body still buzzing with adrenaline. Veronica studied him with those sharp eyes, and he could see her recalibrating, trying to figure out who he actually was, now that her initial assessment had proven so spectacularly wrong. "Where did you train?" she asked, and Raymond almost laughed. "High school choir," he said quietly. Then life happened. The answer seemed to surprise her, as if she could not imagine someone with real talent not pursuing it professionally. There was a knock at the door, Veronica's assistant reminding her that the show had to continue. Veronica nodded, but did not move yet. She was still staring at Raymond, and he could see the wheels turning. Finally, she spoke, her voice lower now, more genuine. "I have a vocal coach, one of the best in the country. If you wanted, I could arrange an introduction." Raymond blinked, not sure he had heard correctly. It sounded like an apology wrapped in an opportunity. Maybe it was her way of making amends. Or maybe it was her way of controlling the narrative, turning this into a story about her generosity rather than her cruelty. Raymond thought about it for approximately 3 seconds. He thought about what lessons with a top vocal coach might cost, about the time they would require, about how he would fit them between his 3 jobs and Danny's needs. He thought about the world Veronica was offering him access to, and how foreign and impossible it seemed. "Thank you," he said carefully, "but I cannot. I have responsibilities. A kid who needs me, bills that need paying. I appreciate the offer, but my life does not really have room for that right now." It was the truth, even if part of him wondered what might have been possible if circumstances were different. Veronica nodded slowly, and for just a moment Raymond thought he saw something like respect in her eyes. She was used to people saying yes to her, to taking whatever she offered, and asking for more. His refusal was probably as unexpected as his performance had been. She reached into her purse and pulled out a business card, pressing it into his hand. "If you change your mind," she said, "or If you ever want to just talk about technique, the offer stands. Then she was gone, sweeping out of the dressing room to finish her show, leaving Raymond standing alone with a business card and the residual rush of the most surreal 30 minutes of his life. He made his way back to his position in the wings, but everything felt different now. The crew members who usually ignored him were patting his back, asking questions, treating him like he had transformed into someone new. But Raymond did not feel new. He felt exhausted and overwhelmed and desperately ready for this night to be over. The show continued. Veronica performed 2 more songs. The auction happened. The gala concluded with its scripted thank yous and farewells. Raymond went through the motions of his job, checking equipment, preparing for strike, but his mind was somewhere else entirely. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from Mrs. Chen. 3 exclamation points and a dozen emojis. "Danny wants to talk to you right now. Call when you can." Raymond stepped outside into the loading area, into the cool night air that felt like relief after hours under stage lights. He called home, and Danny answered on the first ring. "Dad," the boy's voice was breathless with excitement. "Dad, I saw you. Everyone saw you. You were on the screen, and you were singing, and it was so cool." The words tumbled out in a rush, joy and pride and disbelief all mixed together. Raymond leaned against the brick wall of the theater and finally let himself feel it. The fear. The triumph, the absurdity of what had just happened. He listened to his son talk about how kids from school had been messaging him about how Chen had cried about how Danny had always known his dad could sing like that. And Raymond realized that this moment, this conversation with his boy, mattered more than all the applause combined. He had not performed for the audience. He had performed for Danny, to show him that even when life pushes you into corners, even when people expect you to fail, you do not have to accept their story about who you are. The next few days were strange. The video went viral, because of course it did. Nothing stays private anymore. Raymond's face was suddenly everywhere on social media, in local news segments, in compilations of feel-good moments. His phone rang constantly with numbers he did not recognize. A local radio station wanted an interview. Some morning show invited him to appear. A talent agency reached out with vague promises about opportunities. It was overwhelming and intrusive and completely disconnected from the reality of Raymond's actual life, which still involved getting Danny to school and paying rent and showing up for shifts at the theater. Most of the attention Raymond ignored. He was not interested in being famous. Fame was not going to fix his problems, but a few opportunities felt different, felt genuine. A community arts center reached out asking if he would consider teaching a voice class 1 evening a week. The pay was modest, but it was something. A wedding singer contacted him about filling in for gigs. Occasionally nothing glamorous, but weddings paid better than people thought. These were not life-changing offers. They were not going to make Raymond rich or turn him into a star, but they were real and they were possible, and they fit into the life he already had. Veronica Lane posted about the incident on her social media, spinning it as a beautiful moment of discovery and inclusion. She looked good in her retelling, the generous star, giving an opportunity to an unknown talent. Raymond saw the post and felt nothing but exhaustion. Let her have her narrative. It did not change what actually happened, and the people who mattered. Danny Mrs. Chen, the crew at the theater, knew the truth. Some battles were not worth fighting, especially when you had limited energy for battles in the first place. The theater kept him on. Though there were some awkward conversations about protocols and staying in assigned positions, Raymond apologized for the disruption and promised it would not happen again. The stage manager seemed relieved to return to normal, to a world where crew stayed crew and performers stayed performers. Raymond was fine with that. He had never wanted to be on stage. That had been forced upon him. What he wanted was stability for his son, and that meant keeping his head down and doing his job. The viral moment would fade. People would move on to the next story. Life would return to normal, except normal had shifted slightly. The voice class at the community center started with 5 students, all adults, who had always wanted to sing but never had the courage. Raymond taught them breathing techniques, showed them how to support their sound, encouraged them to find their own voices rather than imitating others. It was awkward at first. He was not a trained teacher, just someone with experience and a voice that apparently could do unexpected things. But the students were patient, and slowly Raymond found a rhythm. Tuesday nights became his teaching nights, and to his surprise, he liked it. Liked helping people discover something they did not know they could do. Danny started telling people his dad was a singer, not a crew member, not a maintenance guy. A singer. Raymond would correct him gently. "I fix things at the theater, buddy. I am not a performer." But Danny would shake his head stubbornly. "You sang in front of everyone. That makes you a singer." And maybe the kid had a point. Maybe being a singer was not about doing it full-time or making it your career. Maybe it was just about using your voice and not being ashamed of the sound that came out. Raymond was still figuring out what he thought about all of it. The wedding gigs were actually fun. People were happy at weddings, drunk and emotional, and ready to sing along to anything. Raymond would perform the standard repertoire love songs and classics and the occasional ridiculous request. He wore a rented tuxedo that felt strange on his body, so different from his work clothes. The pay was good enough that he could cut back slightly on one of his other part-time jobs. Not quit entirely. He was not stupid, but reduce his hours enough to breathe a little easier. It was a small change, but small changes added up. Veronica Lane never contacted him again after that night, and Raymond was fine with that. He kept her business card in his wallet, not because he intended to use it, but as a reminder that he had stood on a stage and done the impossible, that he had been pushed into the spotlight as a joke and had transformed it into something else entirely, that his worth was not determined by people who looked at his worn-out shoes and stained shirt and decided they knew everything about him. The card was a small piece of proof that he was more than circumstance suggested. Months passed, and the viral video faded from the internet's collective memory, the way all viral videos eventually do. Raymond's life settled into a new normal, working at the theater teaching voice class, on Tuesdays, singing at the occasional wedding, being a dad. It was not glamorous. He still struggled with bills sometimes. His car still broke down more often than he would have liked. Danny still needed new shoes too frequently. But there was something lighter about it all now. Some small sense that the world might hold more possibilities than Raymond had been allowing himself to believe. The community center asked him to perform at their annual fundraiser. Nothing huge, just a small concert to raise money for arts programs. Raymond agreed, though the thought of being on stage again made his stomach flip. This time would be different, though. This time, he was choosing it. This time, there would be no Veronica Lane setting him up to fail, no audience expecting humiliation, just Raymond and his voice, and people who wanted to hear what he had to offer. Danny helped him pick out the songs, and they practiced together in their small apartment, Danny singing harmony in his unchanged boy soprano, while Raymond worked through the melodies. The fundraiser was in a high school auditorium, maybe 200 people attending. Small compared to the gala, but somehow more intimidating, because these were his people, neighbors and students and families who could not afford expensive theater tickets, but who showed up for community events. Raymond stood in the wings this time by choice and watched the other acts perform. Local kids doing dance routines, a high school band playing covers, a poetry reading. Real art made by real people, not polished professional performances, but genuine expressions of creativity and courage. When his turn came, Raymond walked onto the stage, and the applause was warm, but not overwhelming. These people had seen the viral video, but they were not here for spectacle. They were here because he was one of them, someone who worked hard and tried to make something beautiful in whatever small ways he could. Danny sat in the third row with Mrs. Chen, his face glowing with pride. Raymond adjusted the microphone, took a breath, and began to sing. Not to prove anything this time, not to defy expectations or shock anyone, just to share something he loved with people who might appreciate it. The performance was not perfect. He cracked on one note, came in slightly early on another. But it was honest, and that mattered more. The audience listened with that particular attention people give when they are genuinely invested in what they are witnessing. Raymond sang 3 songs, each one building on the last, his confidence growing not from ego, but from the simple joy of using his voice without fear. The final song was one his wife had loved, and he dedicated it to her memory. By the end, several people in the audience were crying, including Mrs. Chen, who seemed to cry at everything. The applause was sincere, and Raymond felt something settle in his chest. This was what success looked like for him. Not fame or fortune or viral videos, just the ability to stand on a stage and share something true. Just the pride in his son's eyes. Just the knowledge that he had taken something meant to humiliate him and transformed it into a gift. He bowed, thanked the audience, and walked off stage, feeling more himself than he had in years. In the wings, Danny was waiting, and Raymond scooped him up in a hug that said everything words could not quite capture. That night, after Danny had fallen asleep, Raymond sat at their small kitchen table and thought about the path his life had taken. It was not the path he would have chosen if given the option 15 years ago, but it was his path marked by loss and struggle and moments of unexpected grace. He thought about Veronica Lane and her attempt to make him a spectacle, thought about how her cruelty had accidentally given him something back, not a career or fame, but a reconnection with a part of himself he had thought was gone forever. In a strange way, he was grateful, not for her intentions, but for the result. The business card was still in his wallet. Raymond pulled it out, looked at it one more time, then tore it in half. He did not need it. Did not need her world, or her approval, or her connections. He had found his own way back to his voice on his own terms, in spaces that felt like home. The pieces of the card went into the trash, and Raymond felt lighter for it. Some doors were meant to stay closed. Some worlds were not meant to be entered, and that was okay. More than okay. It was perfect in its own imperfect way. Danny stirred in his bedroom, calling out for water. Raymond got up, filled a glass, brought it to his son's bedside. The boy drank sleepily, then grabbed his father's hand. "Dad," he mumbled, already halfway back to dreams. "You were really good tonight." Raymond smoothed his son's hair back, that gesture as natural as breathing. "Thanks, buddy. Now get some sleep." He watched Danny's breathing, even out, watched his small chest rise and fall in the rhythm of deep sleep, and felt the weight of love so intense it almost hurt. This was enough. This small apartment, this sleepy child, this hard-won peace with who he was and what his life had become. Raymond had hit notes that a famous singer could not reach, but that was not the miracle. The miracle was that he had learned to carry his grief and his responsibility and his dreams all at once, balanced precariously, but balanced nonetheless. The miracle was Danny's pride, Mrs. Chen's kindness, the students who showed up to voice class every Tuesday. The miracle was ordinary. Life lived with dignity in a world that tried very hard to strip dignity away from people who worked with their hands and rode the bus and counted pennies. Raymond turned off the light in Danny's room and walked back to the kitchen. Tomorrow, he had an early shift at the theater. Tomorrow there would be bills to pay and problems to solve and the endless logistics of single parenthood. But tonight he allowed himself to sit in the quiet and feel satisfied. Not happy in some overwhelming way, but content. Content with the sound of his voice, the strength of his hands, the love of his child. Content with a life that looked nothing like success from the outside, but felt like victory from within. The stage lights had found him once by accident, and once by choice. Maybe they would find him again, or maybe they would not. It did not matter anymore. Raymond Foster had learned that you do not need a spotlight to be seen. Do not need applause to know your worth. Do not need the world's validation to be exactly who you are meant to be. Some voices are meant for grand stages. Others are meant for kitchen tables and community centers, and the quiet moments when your child needs a lullaby. All of them matter. All of them deserve to be heard. And sometimes when the world tries to make you small, the best revenge is simply refusing to shrink. Raymond had stood center stage in his stained work shirt and reached notes that soared beyond anyone's expectations. But the real triumph was not in the notes themselves. It was in standing there, at all, in refusing to accept someone else's story about who he was and what he could do. In teaching his son through action rather than words that you fight for your dignity even when the fight seems impossible. That you show up for yourself even when no one else will. The apartment was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic. Raymond sat in that silence, comfortable with it, comfortable with himself in a way that felt hard-earned, and therefore precious. Somewhere out there, Veronica Lane was probably performing in some other theater, living her glossy life, moving from triumph to triumph. And that was fine. Let her have her world. Raymond had his own world, smaller and harder, but entirely his. A world built on love and stubbornness, and the quiet refusal to give up, even when every logical reason said he should. Danny would grow up knowing that his father had stood on a stage and done something impossible. But more importantly, he would grow up knowing that his father showed up every day, worked hard, kept promises, and loved him without condition. That was the real performance, the one that mattered. The rest was just a story Raymond could tell someday about the night he was forced to sing solo by a famous singer who thought she was mocking him and how he hit notes she never could. It was a good story, but it was just one story in a life full of them. Each one adding up to something that looked a lot like grace.